Well, hello and welcome to the Figgy Art Museum's virtual Thursdays at the Figgy series. My name is Melissa Moore and I'm Director of Education at the Figgy, and I'm happy you could join us tonight as we kick off a brand new season of programming. For the time being, we're hosting these virtual programs on most Thursdays, so please make sure to check the Figgy's website for information on upcoming programs. We are able to offer these Thursday programs at no cost to you, thanks to the generous sponsorship provided by Chris and Mary Rayburn. Chris and Mary, for that, we are so grateful. Thank you. While these programs are free to watch, I do encourage you to consider becoming a Figgy member. Your support as a Figgy member is vital to the museum and really does help us continue to fulfill our mission of bringing art and people together, even when we can't be together in person. For those of you who are ready to visit the Figgy's galleries, we're open, and we recommend that you check out our website, which has information on updated policies. A quick note, the cafe is temporarily closed and our exhibitions are going through their own season of change as we prepare to welcome in new shows. So definitely check out the website before you visit to see what is open at that time. So at this time, it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Vanessa Sage, who is our esteemed assistant curator and the curator of the exhibition we'll be examining tonight, Blakelock, By the Light of the Moon. Vanessa, welcome, and thanks for joining us this evening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening for this presentation about this new exhibition at the Figge Art Museum, Blakelock, By the Light of the Moon. It is on view through April 25th, and it is in the Lewis Gallery. So the exhibition features 8 paintings by Ralph Albert Blakelock, pulled from the museum collection, some of which have not been on view in decades. They are expressive and atmospheric woodland scenes that illustrate his distinctive painting style, which was derived from his experiences with nature, but also his own, creative imagination and his innovative techniques in creating them. The works range in scale. Many of them are what I'd like to describe as little gems, and the Lewis Gallery provides a wonderful space to connect with these works. It's an intimate gallery with a little bit lower ceilings, and so it creates its own little atmospheric viewing experience. So this evening I'd like to focus on Blakelock's work in the context of American landscape painting and artistic movements of the era. I will also discuss how his work evolved over time, his techniques, and some of the reasons I think that why his paintings continue to fascinate people. And I think, as Melissa mentioned, we will open this up to a Q&A at the conclusion. So if you have any questions, I can get to those then. So this is one of the moonlit scenes that is featured in the exhibition. He is famed for these nocturnes, and you can see the moonlight peeking through the lacy silhouetted trees, and it's very atmospheric, and it's almost like you can feel being there at nighttime in the woods. And along with this work, I thought I would open with a quote by Edward Hale. This is also reproduced in the exhibition, and I thought it was a really nice way to get people to think a little bit differently about the works. So he said, "It is then a sentiment or an emotion that Blakelock portrays rather than beauty of form or harmony of color, rather than idea or story. It is not that he makes us melancholy or cheerful. It is something different, something elusive, something that we call romantic." And I think that serves as a really nice framework because there is something really elusive about his work, something that for people may feel spiritual or emotional, or even that it is transporting them somewhere else. And it can be something that is really difficult to put words to. So, that atmosphere of darkness, stillness that you would feel being alone in the woods at night, And I hope that everyone is able to come to the museum and, see these in person, because, even though you can get a sense of them through this presentation, I think seeing them in person and seeing the texture and the paint and everything in person is something that everyone should do if they have the opportunity. And like Melissa mentioned, we're following a lot of protocols to make our visitors feel safe and comfortable when they're viewing the work in person. Blakelock was born in 1847 in New York City. His father was an English-born physician, and Blakelock was expected to follow into the medical field. Beginning in 1864, he briefly studied at the Free Academy of the city of New York, and this is now City College. It was a school established to provide education, higher education to the children of immigrants, as well as to the poor. And it was based on academic merit, whether you could attend. It is possible that while he was there, he received some limited instruction in drawing, but overall, Blakelock was a self-taught artist, and this instruction at the Free Academy would have been minimal and likely related to geometry. He eventually left the Free Academy in order to pursue art making, and he did see some early success, specifically in relation to his early work emulating the Hudson River School painters. So while Blakelock's work is distinctive, and as I had mentioned, he was largely self-taught, his development was impacted by the work of his contemporaries, as well as general artistic movements that were happening at the time, including Romanticism. So with roots in late 18th century Europe, Romanticism emphasized individuality, emotion, and connection to the natural world. And it broadly influenced arts and culture in Europe, as well as later on in America. So in 19th century America, it really gained traction amid increasing industrialization. It focused on the natural environment as a spiritual and creative font. So many artists, writers, and poets, they sought artistic communion with the natural world, and then they expressed their individual experiences through their artwork, whether it was in painting or in the form of poetry or literature. One example of artists who were closely tied to the natural world during this time is the Hudson River School painters. Now they are whom Blakelock emulated as he was starting out, as he was starting to create art in the 1860s. So the Hudson River School was led by Thomas Cole. It emerged during the early 19th century, and it is distinguished by these pastoral and detailed views glorifying the American landscape. The movement takes its name from a region in the Adirondacks embraced by early practitioners like Asher B. Durand. So on the left, you can see an example of a landscape by Asher B. Durand that is in the museum collection, and that is currently on display in the Adler Schirmer Gallery. And by comparison, you can see an early work on the right by Blakelock. This is not in the exhibition. It belongs to the North Carolina Museum of Art. But you can see, the connections between the two. They're detailed, impressive landscapes. They share a lot of compositional qualities that were also seen in other work by Hudson River School painters. So you have the mountains in the distance, and in the foreground, there's trees and little bits of, natural bits of interest that frame that impressive sweeping panorama. And as a burgeoning artist in New York City, it would make sense that he would pursue a style celebrated by leading arts organizations and that was popular during the era. So organizations like the National Academy of Design and Honorary Artist Society School and Museum that was founded in 1825 and whose collection is going to be featured in the upcoming major exhibition for America. Those two, the Hudson River School and the National Academy of Design, in many ways were tied together, and they really gained traction during the same period. And a lot of the Hudson River School painters were involved with the founding of the National Academy of Design, like Asher B. Durand, who was later a president of the Academy. So in 1867, Blakelock did experience some success with this type of painting. He was around 19 when he was accepted into the annual fall exhibition at the prestigious National Academy of Design. And this exhibition was a great showcase for artists. And the fall exhibition in particular was intended to give attention to up-and-coming artists. Now, it was kind of a laborious process to apply to be included in these exhibitions. You would have to apply, but also turn in a framed painting for evaluation, which would have been expensive to have the painting all framed. And then you would have had to, like Blakelock, would have had to wait a couple months to hear in the mail whether they had been accepted. Now, on varnishing day, they could come to see, after they were informed in the mail whether they were accepted, they could come to the Academy and see where their paintings had been hung, but then also add finishing touches, as well as if they wanted to varnish the work. So this engraving is a depiction of varnishing day around 1870. So this is, this would have been the time when Blakelock, around the time when he had exhibited. And the illustrator has a little bit of fun portraying some of the artists, but this image really reflects the density in terms of the salon style hanging at these Academy exhibitions. They're really chock full. That first year Blakelock was accepted, he also had the honor of being in the main gallery, which was a pretty big deal. It was the same space where the work of the leader of the Hudson River School, Thomas Cole, was also hanging. So this would have been quite the achievement for a painter around age 19. His accepted work was of Mount Washington in New Hampshire. We don't have an image of it, but it was a popular view among American landscape painters at the time. And Blakelock's work, this work was likely pretty similar in style to the one on the previous slide that he had created a year later. He regularly exhibited at the National Academy of Design until 1888. It should also be noted that during this period in the early 1870s, he was also creating paintings of views of Upper Manhattan. And at that time, that was a rural area where a lot of impoverished people lived. And there were a lot of shanties that were built up there. And these paintings are in a more expressive manner than the detailed landscapes in the slide earlier. And so even early in the 1870s, there are some shades of things to come in terms of his expressive handling of paint and some of the things you see in his later work. Now, Blakelock took sketching trips to natural areas throughout the New York region. He would go to the Adirondacks. He probably went to New Hampshire to see the White Mountains. And he also traveled to the American West from 1869 to 1872. It's debated whether he took one or two trips, but he traveled to the Western frontier, to Panama, to Mexico, and to the West Indies. His path of travel in the American West included present-day Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, California, and other locations. And this is throughout his body of work, he would often revisit these experiences, both of the Western landscape, but also of his observations of Native American life. And that is visible here in a work included in the exhibition called Encampment. It's a smaller work. It's about 5 inches tall by 12 inches wide. And in it, you can see in the bottom register of the painting that there are some teepees and figures who look like they're wearing red robes right there. And Blakelock's figures often, in his later work, they often seem to blend with the environment. It's almost like they are part of the land or part of nature. And perhaps that has special significance in terms of his images of indigenous people out west. And I've provided a close-up view because, like I said, this is quite a small work. As I see it on my screen, that's about the size it is in reality. And so you can see a little bit closer and you can see the brushstrokes he used to reference their presence, but also how they continue to merge with the world around them, even upon close examination. During the 1870s, late 1870s and early 1880s, Blakelock's work became increasingly subjective, expressive, and atmospheric. Just consider the encampment I just showed on the slide previous with the earlier work from 1868 and how different those are from one another. This shift coincided with a period when French Barbizon painting, including the work of Jules Dupree on the left of your screen, was really beginning to influence a lot of American artists. It is generally accepted that Blakelock was influenced by Barbizon painting, but to what extent is debated by scholars, whether he developed some of the things he was doing independently or whether he was influenced by art that he saw. Again, it's debatable. Developing in France during the early 19th century, Barbizon painters are known for turning away from the rigid dictates of French academic art and painting natural settings from direct observation. They use loose brushstrokes, soft forms, heavily painted surfaces, and a dark palette. So these are all things that are paralleled in Blakelock's work. The Barbizon painters are also considered predecessors of the French Impressionists, and they influenced a generation of American artists, including the prominent landscape painter George Inness, as well as Alexander Wyatt, both of whom have work on display, again, in the Lloyd Schirmer Gallery. So based in New York City, Blakelock would have had ample opportunity to view work by French Barbizon painters. They were being displayed in galleries across the East Coast. And then he would also have had the opportunity to view work by American Barbizon painters, those American artists who were influenced directly by the Barbizon painters like George Inness. So the prevalence of these works in American galleries and the development of artists like Blakelock and like Inness mark a shift in American landscape painting from that highly representational Hudson River School to more subjective and expressive paintings of the landscape. And Blakelock's work is, it's unique and but it did develop within this context. And here are two examples of works in the exhibition. They have these wonderful inky jewel tones, and then some of the others have these earthy hues of yellow ochre and rust. These later paintings, they're evocative of the natural world rather than realistic representations. So again, when you think back to that earlier Hudson River School style work to these, there's a big difference between the two. The trees and the landforms, they're like tangled masses, and they're silhouetted against the moonlit sky. And the one on the left is an image of sunset. And so you can also see that he liked periods of transition as well. So there's a lot of sunsets, and there's also some sunrises that he painted throughout his career. And these nocturnes, they have a mystical energy, and that's fueled by, his overall painting, but also by the presence of the moon and the moonlight, and our associations with spirituality and transformation and rebirth, and all of these things that we associate with the moon. Blakelock is also frequently linked to transcendentalism, which developed out of Romanticism, and it taught that divinity pervades all nature and humanity. So there's also, that spiritual element. Echoing the enigmatic quality of these works is the process that Blakelock used. It's kind of its own mystery that people have had to figure out how he did it through scientific means. And then also recountances of people who watched him work. And so he was driven by experimentation when he was creating these, and he would apply numerous layers of pigment, both opaque and transparent, translucent, and he would scrape and he would rub out areas of the previous layers before adding more pigment and resin. And then he would use different instruments like wire or steel scrapers or even pumice stone, and to scrape away at the areas that he wanted to either smooth down, or maybe he wanted to get to a layer that was beneath. His daughter even once recalled seeing him run a panel that he had prepared with ground under the water so he could smooth it the way that he wanted it to be. This continuous back and forth and all of these multiple layers creates a really distinctive look. Some of them look as though they're immersed beneath a layer of amber. And a study by Yale University Art Gallery, they studied several paintings and the paint layers specifically on Blakelock's work. And on one work, they uncovered 38 layers, and that was just in one painting. It had 38 layers of paint. And he would reuse canvases and panels to paint over past previous paintings as well. And as you can imagine, all of these layers also present a difficulty in terms of the stability of these paintings, just because there's so many layers upon layers upon layers. In some cases, it could make for issues in that way. And Elliot, he experimented with adding different materials into his paint as well. And there's one anecdote that basically he tried adding tar to his painting, and somebody had bought the work, took it home, hung it on the wall, and this anecdote says that the painting was so heavy it fell off of the wall and was just a puddle of pigment on the floor. One thing that I was really excited about being able to do for this exhibition is I really wanted to show the back of one of the works. And so we figured out a way to do a double-sided display. And so this work, Sylvan Brook, you can actually see the reverse of it as well. So you can see the wood panel it's on, the beveling. You can also see that distinctive arrowhead signature that's on the back. And a little bit more about this, the back of the work, those numbers 45.833M, those are actually the tracking system. So that's the tracking number that the Davenport Municipal Art Gallery applied at some point after its accession in 1945. And the work itself, these works were looked at by one of the foremost Blakelock experts, who is who was Norman Geske, and he stated that these were really unique, that there was something, they were unlike anything before or after. So these are smaller works, and he said in particular that in scale, tonality, and in execution, as well as the boldness of the way that the brushwork is done, that these are unique within his body of work. And Norman Geske, he was involved in the creation of the Sheldon Memorial Art Gallery at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And they have a wonderful online resource if you're interested in learning more about Blakelock, as well as the location of some of his paintings. So during the 1880s and 1890s, Blakelock continued to paint, and that during that time is likely when he painted the works in this exhibition, but he struggled greatly. He was forced to sell paintings at very low prices to dealers as well as collectors. The kind of painting, the kind of subjective, expressive, and really unique painting that he was creating was not as commercially saleable as other modes of painting. And in many ways, he was considered an outsider. He and his wife, Cora, eventually had 9 children, and that also increased pressure. He did have some fellow artists who aided him, including Harry Watrous, who would later become the president of the National Academy of Design. He allowed Blakelock to use the studio for years. He bought many of Blakelock's works, and he acted as an agent, selling them to dealers and collectors. So after years of familial and financial pressures, Blakelock suffered his first mental breakdown in 1891. And from 1899 until his death, he was institutionalized the majority of the time, though he continued to create some artwork, often out of materials that he could get his hands on, cardboard, things like that, etc. Now, looking back, they think that he probably had schizophrenia. Now, ironically, it was during this period that he experienced the recognition that he had sought. The tragic circumstances of his life often tend to dominate discussions regarding his work, so I really wanted to pay attention to his artwork in the context of other artists, his contemporaries, as well as art movements more broadly, and give his work context in that way. So in 1916, 3 years before his death and nearly 50 years after first exhibiting at the National Academy of Design, he was elected to full national academician, which was was a great professional recognition for him. Now, that same year, an individual named Edward Libby bought a painting by Blakelock at auction for $20,000, which was the highest price ever paid for a painting by a living American artist. But this was sold at auction by a man who had bought the work previously. So Blakelock, and this pattern of Blakelock not profiting or, not earning and not being able to have, a better life in a lot of ways, and his family from the sale of his work, is something that was really bittersweet about his success, and something that was present in a lot of other things that happened to him later in his life during this period when his paintings were getting a lot of attention. So there were many individuals who took advantage of his fame. There were lots of forgeries. Some dealers altered the work of his daughter, Marion, so that it would have his signature. Perhaps the most disturbing is a woman named Mrs. Van Rensselaer Adams, who set up a foundation to, help him. But then, the funds disappeared. These funds that were intended to help him and his family. And eventually she had him released from a hospital and moved him to different private care facilities, where he was unable to see his family. And then eventually he died under kind of suspicious circumstances, when she was in charge of his well-being, and he died in 1919. So in terms of this last bit, some of these, the tragic circumstances of his life, I found a quote in 1916 New York Times article, that was attributed to Blakelock, and it was the author of the article told him that there was an exhibition of his works, and Blakelock replied, "Ah, that is good, but show them on their merits alone. Do not resort to sensationalism to get a crowd to look at them. Don't harp on the plight of the man who painted them for the sake of arousing interest." So I hope that you will come view the exhibition and see these works for yourself. It's on view through April 25th, 2021. And I think I'm going to wrap it up there, and we can go through any questions anyone has.
Vanessa, thank you so much. And just as a reminder to our audience members, you're welcome to submit any questions you have through the Q&A function or also the chat. And if you don't have any now, but you wake up in the middle of the night with a burning question that you need to have answered by Vanessa, you can email that to me. My email address is the one where you received the link this evening. It does look like we have a question, Vanessa. How many images are on display in the exhibition?
There are 8 paintings in the exhibition.
And how did the Figge come to acquire so many of his works?
So these came from a couple different sources. They were donated, some by a gentleman named Maurice Hemsing, some by a woman named Clara Brandt. One came from Dr. Lindley. So they came through donation. Now, originally, going through the object files, a lot of these came through originally through Bose Galleries, which is still known to be involved with Blakelock heavily. They just had a big exhibition recently of his works in their gallery.
And there is another question as a follow-up to that. Do you have additional information about Maurice Hemsing, who collected and donated several of the paintings?
I just looked into that a little bit earlier. I think he was a businessman, but I can get some more details on him and send that to whoever asked the question.
Thank you. I'll make sure to connect you with that person. And then another question, are all of the works owned by the Figge, or are we borrowing any of them?
So these are all in the City of Davenport Art Collection, which the Figge is, the caretaker of. And so these are all in the museum collection.
And another question, wondering what you can share about Clara Brandt.
Clara Brandt, I know her and her sister were both involved in philanthropy in the area, and that's about all. Again, I can look more into it. I did look a little bit into it to see what I could find out, but I didn't take a deep dive. So I know that her and her sister were involved in philanthropy, and they did endeavors together. But again, send me your email and I can give you a little more information.
Yep, I'm happy to follow up with you on that. Thank you on both of those. All right, so let's see here. How many paintings by Blakelock do we own overall?
8.
Perfect.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. There were more in the collection, but they were de-accessioned by the museum a while back. And Norman Geske, who I mentioned earlier, he was a Blakelock expert, and he did come and study them. I think he might have done so twice, but there were originally more, but for some reason they were de-accessioned.
And that actually was another question that we had pop up here about any records about the de-accessioning that happened. So thank you for bringing that up. And then just as a reminder, this is in the Lewis Gallery, correct?
This is in the Lewis Gallery, yes.
All right. I feel like we've gone through the ones that have popped up here. We do have a hand raised though, so give me just a moment.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, Linda, we can hear you, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, I was the one asking about the de-accessioning because I knew that before the DMA moved to the Figgy, we did de-accession many works from the collection that were thought by the then curator to be in very poor condition or to be repetitious. And this was thought to be the case of those Blakelocks that were de-accessioned. I'm listening to Vanessa now and wondering if that was a mistake. I know that in the past we've de-accessioned works from the collection, particularly the Vice Regal collection, and we do regret that. I don't remember looking at the Blakelocks that were sold at auction, but perhaps if we had a chance again, we might keep them.
Yeah, they were in the ones that I have seen, and I've gone through the files, and the ones that I have seen the images of, they're very similar to those ones with the lighter color palette, the ones that Norman Geske said were very, very unique within his in consideration of his overall body of work. So yeah, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, it's what's done is done, I guess.
Yeah.
We were able to buy, of course, other art with the funds that were generated by that de-accessioning. That's the only way you can use those funds. So some of the things that we enjoy at the Figgy now are the result of that. There's only so much money to go around, I guess, and we have to be grateful for all the wonderful works we do have.
Yes, absolutely. And they do, they do tend to have condition issues because of all those layers of paint and all of the different, things that he was doing to them as he was creating them. So, yeah.
And restoration is very expensive.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very well done.
Well, thank you, Linda. And let's see, we have one more that's popped up, Vanessa. And that is a reminder that we've used magnifying glasses in certain exhibitions in the past to see close up. Is that something that you would consider doing for this one?
I had really wanted to, but I think the coronavirus kind of put a little damper on that. I would say maybe I'll bring that up at the visitor services desk or at the, so people maybe as they enter, they could get the magnifying glasses, but then they'll have to return them and then they can be wiped down. But yes, I did, because some of the, with the Encampment painting, there's a lot to see that's very, very small. So
I mean, that's a great idea, and I'm sure that's something we can look into just to make sure we're following policies and protocol, but also allowing for close-up views on these beautiful artworks. All right, we have another hand raised. This is by Kay Rungy. So Kay, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to give you the go-ahead to talk. You just have to unmute, and then we'll be able to hear you. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Hey, Vanessa, wonderful job. I really enjoyed it. Would you please tell me how you came to do this exhibit? How was it decided? It fit in the gallery, right? Or we needed one to fill in, or I really am glad you did it. And the Brandt sisters, I know something of. I was just curious what the connection was with the museum. Thank you.
So I think the idea for the exhibition actually goes all the way back to Tim. So Tim really wanted to do a Blakelock, get the Blakelocks out. And I love Blakelock, so I kind of jumped on the chance to be involved with that. And then it's been a little bit of time in the making. I think there are a couple other things that got shifted around on the exhibition schedule a while back. And originally it was going to happen, I think, about a year ago. And then I got pushed a little bit down the line because I think there was something that was time sensitive that we wanted to do in Lewis. So that's the origins of it. And it is, I think it's the perfect amount of work for the Lewis Gallery. And again, I think they're just very well suited to that space.
Thank you.
Well, if anybody else has follow-up questions and you'd like to share them with us, you're welcome to jump in here. Of course, you're also welcome to send an email as a follow-up. I have made note of the questions about Maurice, Hemsing, and Clara Brandt. So Vanessa, I will get you those who have asked those questions, and thank you in advance for any information you can provide. And really, while I'm thanking you, I just want to say thanks again for doing this program. It was wonderful and such a beautiful introduction to this new year, this new season of programming, to the exhibition in the Lewis Gallery. And also, you gave us a little taste of some of the greatness that we're going to be looking forward to in our upcoming major exhibition for America. So
Yeah,
our gratitude for that.
Thanks.
All right, so just a few things to wrap up tonight. I know many of you, our audience members, are excited to see the exhibition in person, which, as Vanessa mentioned, will be on display through April 25th. For those of you who do plan to visit the museum in person, please do remember to check out our website for up-to-date information on those current policies and procedures for visiting, as well as to confirm what floors and what spaces are going to be open during your visit. As I mentioned, things are starting to move around a bit, and fighting always to say goodbye to some of the exhibitions that have been on display and welcome new ones. But with the moving around, we do have some closures. So definitely check that out before you come to the museum. And for those of you who are unable to or not ready to visit the museum in person, we hope that you'll join us for some upcoming virtual programs. You'll be able to find those on our website. I'll just give you an idea for next week, next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Central. We're going to be doing a program called Queering Chronologies, Archiving Identities. This is a panel discussion inspired by the current exhibition. Figge Dido Norris presents the estate of Tamika Janine Norris, which is on view through January 31st. And so we hope you will check out that program online and sign up for it if you're interested. And if we don't see you next week, we'll look forward to seeing you at future programs and maybe even in the museum, hopefully sooner rather than later. So thanks again for joining us tonight. We hope you have a wonderful evening and we'll see you soon. Thank you.